Good morning. I'm Justin Bryant, agronomist with Hudson. We're out here this morning with a 1790 planter. I'm going to kind of go over some quick settings. Once you get to the field, what we're looking for as far as seed placement, depth settings, downforce, those kind of things when you get to the field. So what we're looking at this morning is kind of the core of the row unit right here. We're going to talk briefly about the disc openers, then move back to the gauge wheels and depth settings and downforce. So to begin with, the disc openers, those are something that need to be set in the shop before we get to the field. Using the business card method, you want that contact point on the disc openers around 2 inches, 2 to 2 1/4 inches is spec on that. The first thing I like to set when we get to the field and start trying to set a planter in the spring is the downforce. We want to make sure we've got our downforce set right, or our depth is going to fluctuate too much, and we're kind of going to be chasing our tail trying to set the depth if we don't keep ground contact with the depth, the gauge wheels. So what I like to do is set our downforce on, depending on kind of how hard the ground is. Could be a couple 100 pounds, could be 300, but set it at 150, 200 to get started in the spring. Then come out, set it in the ground, pull up, make sure everything gets aired up. We've got our what we've set in the monitor, and then come out, leave the planter in the ground. And then you'll want to check several gauge wheels across the planter, but just come down and kind of grab it and see how hard it is to move. If you can move it about 1/4 of a turn with a little bit of effort, you're probably in the right ballpark. If it spins pretty freely, kind of like this one is, you probably don't have enough downforce. You need to start cranking it up, and you can do that in the monitor, and keep checking it across the planter. You want to check it several places across the planter, and then just kind of take an average. You may have some that are a little loose, some that you can't move, but just kind of take an average in your head of what you've got there. So once you feel like you've got your downforce set properly, the next thing you want to look at is your depth adjustment. If you're planting corn, you want to be at least 1.5 inches. I prefer to be around 2 inches or so. And agronomically, that's at least 1.5 inches is where you want to be to give enough room for that mesocotyl to come up, and then have plenty of room left for your crown roots to develop. Make sure they're still below the soil surface. So 1.5 inches to 2 inches is usually where we need to be. Like I said, I like to be closer to 2 inches. So each one of these settings is 1/4 of an inch. When you look at your manual, it's not always going to be the same. You can't just count down 8 notches and think you're at 2 inches. You'll want to get out and check that with the depth checker, or dig around and make sure you've got that. Okay, so I mentioned the True V and that contact point on our disc openers. So I'm going to try to show you, we're not in the best conditions, it's still a little wet out here, but going to try to show you what to look for when you're out setting the planter and making sure everything's set right. So as far as the disc openers, they're creating this True V. So you want to get down and make sure that you don't have a W bottom. Like I said, it's kind of hard to tell as wet as this is, but what you'll see is a little raised area, a little seam down the bottom of that trench, and that's what we call a W. And what that's going to cause is maybe some air pockets down there around that seed, and kind of could hurt germination or make seeds germinate not uniform, which we want everything germinating at the same time. So that's what to look for as far as is for your True V opener or your True V trench. Moving on to the gauge wheels and the downforce. The reason we want that set right is so everything is planted at the exact same depth, and as a result, everything germinates and emerges ultimately at the same time. A couple things that we could possibly create by having too much downforce or not enough. I already kind of mentioned one up there with not enough downforce. We can have uneven planting depth, and you can kind of see it here. We don't have our downforce set on this planter yet, but you can see right in here we're at a couple inches at this particular spot, and we can move up a little bit, and we're at 1.5 inches right there. So we don't have enough on these gauge wheels, so that's the reason we're kind of fluctuating there. So that's one thing that we can have. Another thing that we can cause by not having enough downforce, especially in drier conditions, what we'll have is the trench kind of falling in on itself before the seeds dropped in, or before we actually close the trench with the closing wheels. And what that creates is that dry dirt on top kind of falling in, getting around that seed, where it may be a little bit wetter down there at the bottom. So we want the same condition for every seed. So we don't want that trench closing in on itself. The next thing that we could cause by having too much downforce would be sidewall compaction. And a way to check that is to, like we've got our closing wheels up so we can see this trench. You can come in and kind of dig around and kind of feel that sidewall and see what you can see there. We're obviously too wet, so we're definitely smearing that sidewall. It's trying to fall apart all together, or fall in all together there. So we definitely don't want that. What we want, and I don't have a good example to show you, but we basically want it just kind of chipping off a little bit at a time. That's not too bad right there. So we want enough downforce to hold that trench together, but we also don't want too much where it all tries to fall off together when we use the digger to check that.